Two major themes that I've seen since the coronavirus has come is that we are waiting and we are predicting. We're waiting for the curve to flatten and for it to go down so that we can resume our normal lives. But there's something about our human nature that can't help but predict and ask when that's going to happen. The same is true with respect in many ways to the coming of Jesus. We are waiting for him to return, but we just can't help ourselves in being able to predict when we think that will happen. People have been doing that for centuries. In fact, the great theologian Augustine thought that it would happen around 1000. And there are other authors in our lifetime that have done the same. J. Edgar Whisenant wrote a book called The 88 Reasons Why the Rapture Will Happen in 1988. He then went on the next year to write another book, 89 Reasons Why it would happen in 89, and then his book sales began to plummet after that. Other writers in the past decade have written books called The Four Blood Moons, where they thought that Jesus' return would happen at the end of the fourth blood moon, I believe in the year 2016. So there's this aspect of us that we just can't help but predict things, whether it will be the end of our coronavirus quarantine, but even more importantly, when is Jesus going to return? It was a very important question that the disciples had with Jesus toward the end of the book of Matthew, which is a book that we've been going through as a church over the past several months. And in a very famous sermon that he gave, it's referred to as the Olivet Discourse. Jesus sits down on the top of the Mount of Olives and begins to answer the question that the disciples have. When are all of these things going to happen? Jesus, when is it all going to come down? And as Jesus went through very shortly in these long two chapters in Matthew 24 and 25, he goes through the events of what is going to take place very shortly, but spends a much longer time discussing what our attitude should be in the meantime. How are we supposed to live? Are we supposed to be predicting when you come back? What are we supposed to do while we are waiting? And Jesus came to his very important passage in chapter 24, verse 36, where he says these important words. But concerning that day and hour, no one knows, not even the angels of heaven, nor the Son, but the Father only. In times of waiting, we can't help but predict, but Jesus gives us a very important point here for us to recognize, is that Jesus' return is going to be unexpected. One of the most important things he says in this verse is not even the Son. Jesus himself, while in flesh on earth, did not know when these things were going to happen and is not going to know when he comes back. It is in our nature to be able to try to predict who's the Antichrist, when's he going to come back, and all of these events. But the most important thing for us is to realize that he is going to come back and that we need to be ready. In fact, one major point that we can have, because when we do predict and when we inevitably are wrong about those predictions, one thing that we need to keep in mind in this verse is this, is when we try to predict the when and the who, it discredits believers like me and you. When it comes to what our posture really should be like, one of my favorite verses here in the meantime, with the unexpected return of Jesus, is this in 1 John 2:28. And now, dear children, abide in him, so that when he appears, we may be confident and unashamed before him at his coming. What should we be doing in this waiting? Should we be predicting? No, we shouldn't be predicting. We should be abiding in him, following Jesus, keeping our eyes in him. And if he returns in our lifetime or 1,000 lifetimes afterwards, what will matter in the end is what have we done with our life that he gave us for him and for his kingdom.
We have gotten a number of people said, how can we do communion? And it's pretty hard for us to reach through this lens and hand you a bread and a cup. So here's your heads up. This week, at some point, make sure you have bread and juice available. And on Friday's dinner time devotional, I'll lead us through a communion service just for you and your family to take place in your house, and we'll share the Lord's Supper together.